Welcome back. In this lecture, we will cover different kinds of plans and the urban planning process in general. And the different concepts that we will cover is an overview of the urban planning process, different kinds of plans that could be prepared, the National Urban Planning Guidelines and Transport Policy, and planning regions. Starting with the planning process, there are different steps in the planning process. First, we start with a vision. That means for each and every urban area has got different characteristics, and based on the characteristics, the kind of people they live there, or the aspirations of the people, and based on the current the context of that particular urban area, or even the political context, there is a vision for that urban area. So that is first that needs to be formed, and any vision has to be then converted into aims and then specific objectives that needs to be taken up, and different stakeholders needs to be different stakeholders needs to also participate in this process of forming these aims and objectives, and from that is the starting point using which we have a overall idea about what kind of plan is this going to be. In the next step, first, once we have known that what is going to be our vision, in the next step we will determine the current status of development. Development means a lot of things. For example, what is the demographic condition of that particular urban area? What is the spatial condition of that particular urban area, or means what kind of area, what kind of municipalities are in the surrounding area? Do we need to increase the size of the urban area, and so on? The socio-economic development of the urban area, the infrastructure in that particular urban area, and then of course the environment in that urban area. So we need to understand what is the current status of development, and once we understand that, we need to then we need to analyze what are the gaps as per the current guidelines, urban planning guidelines. Is this infrastructure, or is the socio-economic the parameters for that particular area, is this enough, or is it as per guidelines, or if there is a gap? If there is a gap, we have to bridge that gap. So once we know that there is a gap, the next step is to understand that how we can bridge this gap by providing certain policies or certain steps that could be taken in that urban area. But when we are taking a step, it takes certain amount of time. So we can bridge a gap for today's problem, but we first need to analyze what will happen tomorrow, or rather we need to first determine what kind of growth is going to happen in the near term or in the long term, and then along with existing gaps and also the gaps that will arise because of this future development, we need to finally determine what kind of urban plan we need to do. So the next step in the process is to project the growth of the urban area, and by projecting the growth, it means both the spatial projection, that means how the urban area is growing, the status of, and of course we need to understand the status of development in that particular scenario, and as per the business as usual scenario. What it means is we are not going to make major changes in the urban area. If the urban area continues to grow as it is, what will happen in the urban area? In the next step, we do once we do that, for this business as usual scenario, we will see that there would be, because there are already gaps in the urban infrastructure, urban land use, and so on. We can say that definitely if the urban area is going to grow in the same way, automatically the gaps will actually increase. So that is what needs to be bridged. And before we do that, we can also look into certain policies or certain plans that could be done to bridge this gap, and then we need to analyze the impact of these policies and standards in a scenario, in form of a scenario analysis. So one is business as usual scenario, and the other is in an alternative scenario where you change certain parts of the previous direction in which the urban area was growing. For example, you may say that, well, I will provide a heavy rail transit system or a metro rail transit system. So if a metro corridor comes up in that urban area, definitely there is going to be change. So if that change happens, that means a gap which was remaining earlier may be bridged or it may not be bridged, but we need to understand that. Similarly, if I say that, well, we will increase density of that urban area because the urban area is growing in form of a sprawl. So we say that, well, in certain areas of the city we will increase FAR or floor area ratio. So if that is done, in that case also what would be the impact? So we need to understand this different policies which can be implemented, and then what would be the impact of these particular policies. So so this part is called known as scenario analysis, and once we do this scenario analysis, we actually understand how our future plan would be or what could be done to improve our urban area. And so we can say that the next step is plan formulation, which has to be both realistic, sustainable, financially viable, inclusive, and should also meet all the statutory obligations. That means it should meet all the rules, laws of the land. It should be inclusive. That means we should take into account the entire population, all socioeconomic groups, all groups which are challenged in certain way or other. And then the plan should be financially viable. That means we can propose a lot of infrastructure, but if we don't have money, we cannot implement that. So the plan should be financially viable. And once these plans are formulated, it needs to be reviewed. And reviewed by whom? Reviewed by both experts as well as the stakeholders for whom the plan is being prepared. So that means once a plan is being prepared for an urban area, it needs to be put in front of all the different stakeholders. It needs to be put in front of the people for them to give any feedback. And once the feedbacks are being accounted for, we revise the plans, and finally we have a plan modification process, and ultimately at the end of that we get our final plan. So this is the overview of the urban planning process, and this is more or less undertaken for all different kinds of plans. But there are three things that we need to be very, very careful about. One is the scope and purpose of the plan. The second is the time frame of the plan, and the third is the spatial area for which we are doing the plan. So for example, the scope and purpose of the plan is guided primarily by the vision that we have formed at the beginning. That means the plan would be able to do certain things, but it may not be covering certain other things. It depends on what is what we are focusing on, or what is our vision. So scope and purpose is very important. And then of course the time frame. Now for what time period we are preparing the plan? Are we preparing the plan for a 5-year period or a 20-year period or even longer than that? So that will influence how we are going to do our projections, what kind of variation in the projections will come into play, and so on. And finally the spatial area. That means depending on the spatial area, the kind of proposals that come up is different. For example, when we are planning for a small neighborhood, we can say, well, we will make certain kind of infrastructure in that particular neighborhood. But when we are planning for the city, probably we cannot plan the exact infrastructure, but we can say there is a requirement for infrastructure. Then when we are talking about a region or a district, in that case also we need to say, okay, how the larger infrastructure would be put in. For example, how do we put in a highway? Which should be the transportation linkages that should be brought in? So depending on the spatial area, the planning recommendations also vary. So next we will talk about the different kinds of plans that are actually taken up in different urban local bodies and in the regional setting. First of all comes the perspective plan. This plan is it's mostly a vision document or a policy document for a long period. Usually a 20-year period is taken up, and it is mostly a concept plan. That means it gives the planners or the people or the stakeholders an idea how the city should grow, or what should be the broad strokes that should be undertaken so that we can set up a direction of growth for the city. The next comes the regional plan, where we are looking at a little bit more concrete plan, but at the same time we are not looking into one single urban area. We are looking into a region which contains both urban areas, rural areas, semi-rural areas, and so on. And when we are doing this kind of a plan, we should be also understanding what are the overall goals for developing this particular region. For example, we may want to prevent migration from one region to another, for one part of the region to another. For example, a lot of people are moving out from the villages to the urban areas in this particular city. we may try to balance that. If there is huge amount of people moving into the city without any kind of shelter and all, that will create infrastructural problems or other kind of problems in the city. So we need to manage that. So that is also part of regional planning. Then we also need to understand how do we develop the different resources or make use of the different resources available in a regional area. Then how do we decide on investments for this particular entire area so that this area grows, and again that and for the planning period. So a region plan is a broader, bigger plan. It is more of coordinating the plans of local bodies and the coordination among these bodies, and this plan is also taken up for a 20-year period. So I could summarize that by saying a region is a large area with multiple urban and rural settlements and other areas which are either linked through administrative boundary, economic dependencies and geographical features, or through adjacency. That means usually the area that we take up for a region has to be adjacent. That means different parts of the area should be adjacent. For example, there are 2 or 3 urban areas. So if they are more or nearby, then only we will constitute a regional plan for that area. If they are too far apart, there is no point of having a regional plan. Similarly, when we are talking about land use, so similar to land use, we can also talk about the transportation part. So intra and inter-regional transportation and other linkages could be also taken up, and we need to find out if the linkages are adequate. That means they are creating enough opportunities for people to travel from one zone to another, or making sure that trade is taking place efficiently. So transportation is also a big part of regional plans. So what are the different aspects of regional planning? What we should do? The first point that everybody will every planner should look at it, of course, to maintain sustainability. That means sustainability in terms of resource management, sprawl prevention, cultural resources. That means a regional plan should not only look at the physical resources that are in hand, but also it will look into the development of cultural resources. It will look into the environmental challenges facing this region. For example, the green cover, if it is reducing in a particular region, that needs to be taken care of in a regional plan. Then pollution prevention in this particular region, like the entire watershed is getting polluted either from certain heavy metal contamination or certain other, or depletion of groundwater resources. So that could be only taken up in a regional plan, because it may not be a local problem. It may be a problem spread across a region. Then there is, of course, disaster management. It's same, disasters doesn't happen only to a particular urban body or a local body. So urban local body, so it is happens in a particular area. So that also has to be taken care of in a regional plan. And then, of course, balanced development in between the different regions and inclusive development, so that there are regional disparities doesn't happen. Not too much of regional disparity should be there in a homogeneous region. So these are the different aspects of regional planning, or the different targets we should have. And when we do regional plan, again the land, we also need to classify the land into different components. For example, we have certain areas reserved as urbanizable zone. We don't go beyond that. That means we don't divide the urbanizable zone into different smaller components. We keep it at the developed land in this particular level. Then comes the transport and communication zone. Then primary activity zone, which is mostly linked with agriculture and other kind of activities. Industrial zones. For example, we need to set up industries in this particular region. So which are the areas that could be reserved for industries? Open area zone, and that means we should, those areas should be reserved or kept, open. Then protective and eco-sensitive zones, the areas which should be protected. And then spatial area zones, which are like, areas which we should be very, either they are special because of maybe there are certain tribes living in that area, or there are forests in the area, and so on. So these are certain special zones that also we need to take care in the regional plans. So after regional plan, then of course the next level is of course the urban local bodies. And in urban local bodies, usually what we do is we prepare, either we can go for a perspective plan, that means it's a vision document, or we can go for a development plan. And development plan, or alternatively it is also called as master plan. Some urban areas call it as master plan, some areas call it as development plan, and this is basically a statutory plan. What it means is, that means at the end of this planning plan there is a document, and whatever rules and guidelines are given in that particular document, people have to, or all the stakeholders have to adhere to that. So it's a statutory document which is prepared when we do a development plan. So if the city already has got a perspective plan, so definitely the development plan will be guided by that. But it is not only the perspective part, we not only look into broader proposals for that particular area, but we actually develop strategies and physical proposals for that particular urban area. For example, we will divide certain zones in the area for certain land, we will reserve certain areas for certain land uses, or we will divide the city into different kinds of land uses. We will say that this area you can develop residences, in another area you can develop commercial, and depending on a strategy that we have got to develop this area in a sustainable way, we will adopt different measures. So this is where we integrate land use and transportation and in the planning process. For example, land, as I discussed in our earlier lecture, that land use and transportation, even though this could be done separately, they are very, very linked, and when they are done together, that results in a more sustainable plan. That means if we are aware of the transportation challenges when we set up land use, we will obviously design our land use in such a way it doesn't create those transportation challenges. Or if I provide transportation in certain areas, definitely it will improve the land use potential or the potential of that particular land use. So integrated land use and transportation plan, considering economic and social needs, user perception and aspirations of the people, and with the available resources, that is the goal while preparing a development plan for a particular urban area. So in terms of, so this is one part, but again development plans doesn't specify exactly what sort of infrastructure needs to be in place. It may determine what is the lack of infrastructure, but it will not develop the plan for particular infrastructure. That is taken up in other plans. And here also the planning period ranges for a period of 20 years, and in some cases you also find that development plan has been done for a longer period, 30-year period, but it has to be undertaken in phases. That means the phases could be either of 5 years, which is very standard, because at the end of 5 years, after elections, government changes, so certain priorities change, and sometimes it is done even for shorter time periods. So development plan is the document which is prepared for different urban bodies, so that acts as a guide for future development of the urban area in terms of land use, transportation, socio-economic development, infrastructure development, and also protection of environmental and other sensitive areas, and industry, and also the economic development of that particular urban area. So as we discussed right now, that development plan more or less looks at the gap in infrastructure, or it will provide us how the land use and transport will be developed. But once land use and transportation is in place, and we know that this kind of infrastructure needs to be done, then actually taking up a particular area and determining how the plot should be, or how a detailed land use plan for that particular zone should be, like how what should be the land use of each plot, and then what kind of infrastructure and services could be provided for this particular urban area, and detailed design of those infrastructure services are part of the local area plan. So our planning period, and as you can understand, because the plan is more specific, that planning period is also smaller. So we plan for a period of around 5 to 20 years. So sometimes the plans are just for 5 years, and sometimes it could be again done in phases, and it could range for even 20 years. So sometimes along with these local area plans are of different kinds. Sometimes we can have a zonal plan, sometimes we can have a ward committee plan, sometimes we call them town planning schemes, sometimes we can take up a particular area and redevelop that area, like for example breaking down certain brownfield areas and then developing at high density in those areas. So that's certain kind of redevelopment plans. These are all part of local area plans. So in addition to local area plans, there are also certain other kinds of plans which are undertaken in urban areas. For example, there are special purpose plans, that means which are designed for a certain purpose in mind. For example, I need to develop a industrial area. So a industrial area is developed only keeping in mind industrial infrastructure will be provided in that area so that industries can move into that area. So that could be a special purpose plan. Then there are annual plans. Annual plans are a variation of the local area plans where when you do plan for very short periods of time, so then we can call it an annual plan. And then there are of course projects, that means individual infrastructure preparations, like for example deciding on a sort of sanitation network or a sewerage network for a particular area. That could be part of a project. So these are the different levels of plans that are undertaken in an urban area, and these plans are taken. It's not like if you have one plan you cannot do other plans. At different levels plans are developed. For example, you can have a development plan, perspective plan, and a local area development plan all together at the same time for an urban area. But what is important is all these plans these are all disjointed, means every state agency will develop these plans and every local area, urban local body will develop in its own way. They will have their own vision, they will have their own purposes, aims and objectives and so on. But actually there has to be some control. Otherwise some plans should not consider, or rather they will ignore certain things which are absolute necessity in today's context. So that is where certain national level policies and national level guidelines are also considered. So so when we talk about national level policies, the National Urban Transport Policy is the one which is very, very important, and it is useful for mostly transportation planning. But as you understand, transportation planning cannot be done alone. Transportation and land use planning is done together, and the National Urban Transport Policy also talks about that. So it's a national level framework which guides urban transportation planning at the state level, and when you have this particular framework, it helps not only in parity of the plans and their the objectives for different urban areas. So it also helps in evaluation of certain projects or certain plans when we have to decide on what kind of financial assistance needs to be released for these urban local bodies. So a national central government or state government can evaluate evaluate different projects for an urban local body or different plans for an urban local body by saying that how much of it adheres to national policies. So that is why this kind of policies are important. And talking about the National Urban Transport Policy, it has been developed in 2006 and then it was revised in 2014, and this policy categorically states that there needs to be integrated land use and transport planning. So transport and land use planning cannot be done separately. So what are the benefits, or rather why do we do integrated land use transport planning? For example, first, as we discussed earlier, integrated planning results in more guided peri-urban development, and if you can have a guided peri-urban development, you will be able to prevent sprawl. So this is one of the primary benefits of doing integrated land use transportation planning. Then the next point that we can discuss on, and that means we always talk about this travel demand management. Now travel demand management actually is not only this contains lot of characteristics for transportation characteristics for an urban area, which are like trip length, travel time, efficiency of movement in an urban area. And travel demand management actually refers to different policies, guidelines which actually helps in reducing trip length or reducing travel time or making the entire travel pattern of the city efficient. So this travel demand management is again a very big component of national urban transport policy, and it's also could be only achieved if we can do integrated land use transportation planning, so that both land use and transportation planning can together, when they done in an integrated way, can only help in help us to efficiently manage travel, the demand for travel. So that's why we call it a travel demand management plan. So similarly, we can also control the city form and land use pattern using integrated land use transportation planning. So the term transit oriented development is actually a way to control the city form. You can, if we develop very high density developments along transit corridors, so automatically what happens, it becomes easier for people to avail the transit to move from one location to another. And if we do dense development around transit corridors, automatically we can avail this particular transit facility for many people who are living around this particular station area. So that's why transit oriented development is again another component of the national urban transport policy, which guides city form and land use pattern, and it's a part of integrated land use transportation planning. And similarly, when we talk about transportation, we cannot ignore the non-motorized transportation. If we can always talk, the transit oriented development is form of a motorized transportation. So non-motorized transportation, like for example walking, bicycling, these are also part of the national these are highlighted in the national transport policy, and through integrated land use transportation planning, we can actually increase the amount of people using this particular non-motorized mode by bringing people together or reducing their trip times or trip lengths. So if the trip length is small, more number of people would be using bicycles or using walking as the transport mode. And when we have so many different kinds of mode in an urban area, we also need to have we will have a multimodal transportation system, which would be also along with multimodal transport interchanges. This together we can have a very efficient transport network along with a very efficient land use pattern for a particular urban area. So along with national transport policy, we also have national urban planning guidelines. So these are town planning guidelines which have been prepared first during the year 1996, and it was called Urban Development Plans Formulations and Implementation, UDPFI, and it was created by the Institute of Town Planners in India. And then in 2014 it was modified, or rather not, it was overhauled by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, and the new guideline is called Urban and Regional Development Plans Formulation and Implementation Guidelines, URDPFI. And using these guidelines, they could be used as references for urban planning and infrastructure development by the different planning organizations, by consultants, by state governments, and also as students you can look into these guidelines to understand what are the possibilities that we can, what are the possibilities of development, or what are the good ways of to do planning in an urban area, what are the challenges that an urban area faces, and how it could be taken care of. So these are in addition to national transport policy, national urban planning guidelines is a way to develop our integrated land use transportation plans for urban areas. So finally, we come to the comprehensive mobility plan. So while both the national transport policy and the national urban planning guideline, both of them talks about different planning policies and different standards, comprehensive mobility plans actually talks about the techniques and the tools and the different kinds of transportation projects that needs to be undertaken. So it connects the statutory land use plan of development plans with different transportation projects that could be taken up in an urban area. So a comprehensive mobility plan is again a document, or it's a set of document which specifies how a mobility plan or a transportation plan could be taken up for an urban area, and how it should be integrated with different components of urban systems like land use, the demography, the population or the jobs or the building use for different urban areas. So these are the different kinds of guidelines that we have got in which helps planners to develop plans for urban areas. And finally, we have come to the final part of this lecture, where when we plan, at the previous lecture we also stressed about the spatial area is very important, like the zone for which we are planning, that is also very important. So of course it can be based on, so a plan could be based on the administrative boundaries. That means it could be for a district, it could be for a metropolitan area, or it could be for an urban local body. So, but at the same time it could be also done with a different purpose and also for a different zone, which is called an investment region. That means we can develop plans for areas which are connected, and for example there is a highway, and along the highway there are certain urban areas, and of course there are other opportunities of investment in those areas, like we can set up a manufacturing, a set of area where there will be a lot of manufacturing industries, a manufacturing hub or an industrial hub, or it could be a logistic hub. So this kind of regions or zones, these are called investment regions, and they are primarily based on potential to attract investment and subsequent economic development. And again, for this particular investment regions, this actually are developed so that the area's economy grow, or it actually pulls up the economy of the surrounding area as well, or even the state, or the, not only one state, it may spread over multiple states. And in this particular plan also, we will also do the planning process almost remains same. Along with the standard steps that we have decided, you also need to stress on the infrastructure gap, because primarily we are trying to bring in investment, and for that we require infrastructure. And we need to also identify the last mile connectivity issues. For example, if we are developing a certain area, it should be connected with the highways, national highways or the regional highways. So this connectivity issue needs to be solved. So this, in addition to the different steps we have already discussed in the planning process, this is how we can develop an investment region. And some examples of this investment regions or corridors are Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor, Chennai-Bangalore Economic Corridor, Bangalore-Mumbai Economic Corridor, and so on. And along with this, we can also have some spatial regions like environmentally and culturally, primarily environmentally sensitive areas, like ecologically challenged area or a culturally sensitive area. For example, it's a habitat for some. It could be also a habitat for a wildlife. It could be it would be an area where certain kinds of people, a tribe, remains, who doesn't wants to get mix with the normal sense of development. They want to carry on with their own culture and so on. So this kind of spatial regions also could be considered while deciding on different planning regions. So for this particular lecture, these are the documents which you can refer to. Some of the documents we have already covered in the previous lecture. In addition to that, you can look into the National Urban Transport Policy, again made by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, and then different the ministries also, you can look into a comprehensive mobility plan, the toolkit for developing a comprehensive mobility plan. So these documents are also available at the ministry website, which you can refer for understanding what are the different things that needs to be taken up while preparing comprehensive mobility plans. So to conclude this particular lecture, I will say purpose, time frame and region determines the scope of preparation of any plan. So this is one. And second, land use and transportation plans are guided by National Urban Planning Guidelines and National Urban Transport Policy, and these have to be developed following an integrated planning framework. So we cannot develop them as a separate entities. We have to develop them in an integrated manner. Thank you.